Welcome back, everyone. We're continuing our dialogue with Tayyaba, Azeem and Zeus Sequeira. I have a question for each of you. How does inclusion advocacy for persons with disability intersect with your day-to-day work? Tayyaba, can we start with you, please?
That's a good question. In my view, the corporate world has been made by able-bodied people for able-bodied people, and and by that I mean that in terms of ergonomics and culture, a lot of the stuff that we see is primarily geared towards able-bodied people, and so persons with disabilities usually just try to fit in. And so for me, one of the most important things is now after I have started this work, I now understand that inclusion isn't only about me trying to fit in and trying harder to fit in, but it's also about the employer taking the responsibility to help me fit in and to also help me grow. So I think I am a lot more comfortable now, and I talk about my disability a lot more comfortably.
Zeus, how about you?
Yep, I think that that's a really good question. I would say that addressing this from an employer perspective, right, rather than an employee perspective, I think generally when you include people with diverse backgrounds, especially people who've gone through adversity, you get diverse spectrums of resilience, but also points of view, right? And that actually prepares an organization to innovate in ways that they never thought possible before having these people from diverse backgrounds at the table.
Certainly, having one view doesn't lead to competitiveness. So the more diverse our views are around that table, whether it's the boardroom table, whether it's the shop floor, whether it's in management, certainly it makes companies much more competitive and prosperous.
Yes.
So, talking about that inclusion piece, Zeus, does it just come naturally to you, or do you work at it? And does it come naturally to the people around you?
I would love to say that it comes naturally to all of us, especially me. But I try to challenge myself every single day, especially when I'm hearing a perspective that I don't agree with. Before stepping into challenge, really taking a moment to understand the other person's point of view. Because as much as I would like to believe that given my lived experience, I am all about inclusion. I still have to remind myself that my experience is my personal experience and it has biased me. And I think that everyone could benefit from that. Don't assume that it comes naturally to you. Push yourself out of your comfort zone and really, listen when you don't agree with something before you jump in.
Tayyaba, what about you? I know for me, inclusion sometimes means you see something and you can never unsee it. What has been your
Yeah,
experience in the workplace?
I'm quite interested. I mean, I I liked what Zeus had said earlier. So in my case, it does come naturally to me, particularly if I have to stand up for others. But I have worked on it when it comes to standing up for myself.
So, if we say that inclusion is this journey and we, get better at it over time, whether it's advocating for ourselves or advocating for others, is there anyone along that journey that particularly stood out to you and helped you to envision the importance of inclusion in the workplace?
People who were successful were usually people who could speak well. So unfortunately, I didn't completely identify with anyone. I did feel out of place for a long time. But I think nowadays there is a lot more emphasis on authenticity. So I think things are changing now.
Zeus, what about in your life? Was there anyone along your journey or your path that was particularly stood out as helping you in the whole inclusion piece?
My grandfather actually was a huge role model to me. He was a really successful engineer. Late in his career, he, contracted a disease that affected his vision and he started losing his vision. He was sort of able to use his sense of hearing when his eyesight like became deficient to b- perform equally as well. And he did land up retiring as chief engineer. And even though that was because I was just a couple of years old when that happened. The story stood out because to me, he was able to change people's minds about what was possible and made me think that, if someone has a particular opinion of me and what I can or can't do, it's up to me to change their mind rather than just accept that limitation.
Thank you for sharing that, Zeus. That was great, and thank you, Tayyaba. You've both, shared so much. You've added your voice to the conversation, so we very much appreciate that. Want you to keep up the great work, and just thank you for making time for Louie and I to have this chat with you.
That was such a great conversation with Zeus and Tayyaba. Two things stood out for me. The first was when Zeus talked about rebranding disability, and that strikes me as very true, that's something we have to remove, that stigma and the unconscious bias that a lot of people have around the idea of disabilities and what people with disabilities can do. The other thing that really struck me was when Tayyaba shared that originally she hadn't considered her stutter a disability. And it wasn't until she faced barriers and challenges in the employment segment that she really started to self-identify as somebody with a disability. I think we can't forget that a lot of people may be experiencing that themselves. And so again, no assumptions, ask people what they need to be able to succeed in the workplace.
Yes, Lisa, two very amazing people. A Fulbright scholar, an MBA grad, with an engineering degree. We often say that the disability talent pool is full of very skilled individuals. Our two guests certainly exemplify that. Can we really afford not to tap into the disability talent pool? Can we really afford not to improve the labor outcomes of persons with disabilities?
It's so true, Louie. I mean, both those individuals have done exceptionally well in their careers, and rightly so. They're so talented. I don't think that we can afford to ignore the great talent that's out there.
Absolutely. And now it's time for Tips of the Week.
If we're looking to create change, we need to set a goal. We need to have a map and know where we're going.
Yeah, and a goal can be almost anything, but it should be aligned with the strategic direction of your organization.
Some examples of goals that I can think of off the top of my head are to review our policies and procedures to make sure they're accessible. It might be to provide company-wide training, support an employee resource group, an ERG, for people with disabilities.
And it's a really good idea to get buy-in from everyone in the workplace.
Measure it, hold someone accountable.
Because what is measured, Lisa, is what gets done.
Absolutely, Louie.
And now it's time for the last word.
Has accessibility for people with disabilities run its full course? Doesn't everybody already know what they need to know? Of course they don't.
But Lisa, a lot has changed in the last decade, especially with respect to inclusivity.
Yes, a lot has changed and we've made considerable strides, but we're still not far enough along.
There's been legislation, Lisa.
There has been legislation, but awareness of that legislation has to increase, and so do the ways that businesses can adhere to that legislation to improve their productivity and profitability.
But you know that many, many companies have broken down barriers to participation for persons with disabilities. You know that they have created inclusivity policies. You know that they understand accommodation, and they are accommodating persons with disabilities.
So I also know that attitudes at all corporate levels is the leading impediment to the employment of people with disabilities. I also know, when I look at my fact sheet here, Louie, that 59% is the employment rate for Canadians with a disability compared to 80% for those without a disability. So there's still that employment gap. We also know that there's still inequality for people with disabilities with regards to education, housing, employment, transportation, and accessing accommodations. The average after-tax income, Louie, for a person with a disability is $19,000. But the average after-tax income for people without disabilities is almost $39,000. That's too large of a gap.
So even though there's been toolkits created, there's all kinds of educational materials disseminated, you're saying more needs to be done.
Yeah, I'm saying I think there are some great toolkits, which is why we've curated them all onto one site so people can find them easily. Sometimes accessing or knowing where to look for that information is as important as the information itself. So go to www.discoverability.network, and we have a roadmap with links to what I think are the best tools out there.
Okay, but if I'm a business, I can't just go to a website, pull some information down, and then all of a sudden, I'm an expert. Is there some other help I can get?
Yeah, so there's training, there's free training programs. We've talked about that. You can contact us. We're here to support business. I also think you can start looking for the candidates and seeking, again, those different viewpoints to build accessibility from within.
I remember a stat now, because you quoted me some stats.
I did.
I remember a stat that over 60,000 students in our post-secondary schools have self-declared as having a disability. So this is a huge talent pool here with great skills.
Absolutely, and even within the workforce now, Louie, we know that 60% of people who self-identify as having a disability will not speak about that disability or share any information, including, the need for an accommodation to employers. So there's still an awareness gap, there's still a comfort gap. We need to build safer places so people can excel.
So even though we've come a long way, which you will acknowledge.
I will acknowledge we've come a long way, Louie.
There's still a lot more to do.
There's absolutely more work to be done.
I can't argue with that, Lisa. And that's the last word. Lisa, one of the takeaways from today's episode is that change does not happen in a vacuum. You need real leadership, and that leadership needs to be at all levels of the organization. It's not good enough just to have inclusive policies. Those policies must lead to action, and those actions should be measurable.
Well said, Louie. I want to thank today's guests, Tayyaba, Azeem, and Zeus Sequeira.
And I'd like to thank the Government of Ontario, whose support made this program possible.
And of course, we want to thank you, the viewers. A reminder, follow us on social media. You can go to Facebook and Twitter using the handle @HigherAbilityNow. You can find us on our website, www.discoverability.network. LinkedIn, look for Discoverability Network. Look at our YouTube channel to see past recordings. And of course, join us for our honest conversations every Thursday at 1 o'clock. Sign up on Eventbrite.
And as always, Lisa, it's been a pleasure.
Bye.
And folks, thank you for watching.